My father let me believe my mother abandoned me as a child, but the truth is much worse. My father told me that my mother had packed up and left us when I turned 2 years old. I grew up to resent and hate her mainly because I saw how my father was working super long hours to make ends meet. I hated how my grandma basically had to raise me. When I would ask her about my mother, my grandma painted a picture of a bitter, spiteful, hateful and entitled woman. I felt very justified in my anger and hate for her. That's what my family told me, and I had absolutely no reason to doubt them. A few weeks ago I found her on social media while at my boyfriend's house. She was out there living her best life. She is a chef in a Michelin star restaurant. She travels, has a huge apartment, and apparently is married to a gorgeous man. In a fit of rage, I messaged her cruising her out for abandoning me to live her glamorous life and that karma would come to her. She obviously saw it. Instead of going off on me, she just asked me to meet her and that she felt like I had a right to express my anger to her in person and that she owed me as much. I was starstruck because my father said she never stood for the consequences of her actions. Without telling anyone, I agreed. She invited me to this amazing restaurant. She paid an Uber for me and everything. It was very awkward at the beginning. I kept berating her. I was so angry. I cried a little. She just sat there and took it all in. I then asked her why she abandoned me. She then asked, "Do you really want to know the whole story? It is not nice and you will not like it. I am ready to be the bad guy in your head forever and keep my distance." I just kept pressing her. And then she told me the real story. She told me that my father and she met shortly before ending university. At that time my mother had said she did not want to stay in the university town. A few months after dating, my father told her that his landlord was evicting him because the apartment was needed for immediate family use. She offered him to stay while he found something else. Months passed and he was not doing anything. Then she got a job offer in another country. She told my father that he could take over her apartment or come with her. They had this huge fight where my mother told him that she was not ready for the type of commitment he wanted. She wanted different things in life than him, and that as much as she loved him, they weren't compatible. They stayed living together, and then one day she found out she was pregnant. She told me honestly that she was thinking of not having me. She did not feel ready to be a mom at 22. She did not feel maternal feelings. She said she was already struggling with depression and late-diagnosed ADHD. My father convinced her to have me. He said he would take me because he had a right to me. That he would go after her because that baby was also his. So she had me and said that the time after birth was really bad. My father was dragging out the legal procedures. He refused to vacate the home. My mother said that while she felt love for me and that there were moments when she felt overjoyed, it was overshadowed by huge waves of suicidal ideation. She was scared that she was going to hurt me. She also showed me some of the court documents of that time that backed up her claims. In the end, she was so desperate that she agreed to stay with my father if he agreed to be the main caretaker. He did, but only half followed through with it. My mother then told me that it got so bad that she tried to end it around my 2nd birthday after a particularly nasty fight where my father admitted to having tampered with her birth control. She showed me the papers of the involuntary 72 hours commitment and the legal documents where she was found unfit to be a parent. Afterward, I felt nauseous after all that. I would have not believed her, hadn't she brought so much evidence with her. She then asked me what I meant in my message that we were struggling. I told her that we were not exactly rich and that I was struggling to come up with the money to go to university in another city. She was bewildered and asked me what my father had been doing with the monthly payment she was making. I told her that we don't receive that money. Then she took out another stack of papers. She was sending child support every month. It is almost $3,000 every month. She is court mandated to pay me $1.5K. She doubled the payments out of her own will. She doesn't have to pay that amount. She wants to. She was very concerned about this and told me she would talk to her lawyers to transfer the money to me directly. In the end, she apologized to me. She then told me to take my time. She would contact me again regarding the payments and that it was up to me if I wanted to see her again. That she couldn't be the mother I wanted, but the least she could do is help me with anything that I need. I hugged her and we both cried. I boxed up my food and she got me another Uber home. When I got home, my father was not there, so I went straight to bed. I left early the next morning and I am staying with my boyfriend. My whole life is a lie and I don't know what to do with this information. My father let me believe my mother abandoned me as a child, but the truth is much worse. I found out that my mother never really abandoned me because she didn't want me, but because she tried to commit suicide and was deemed unfit to parent. Plus my father basically trapped my mother with me. After meeting my mother, I went snooping because I do not trust my father anymore. I found records of domestic abuse perpetrated by my father toward my mother. He was charged but never ended up going to jail or did a very reduced sentence. This would have been when I was 2 after my mother was committed. I also found a restraining order filed by my mother against my father. It was so much worse than what she said. He did not only abuse her emotionally but also physically. I returned to my boyfriend again. My father has been calling a lot asking why I had spent so much time away from home. My excuse is a family emergency on my boyfriend's side. I want to confront him but I don't feel safe. After staying with my boyfriend for a while, I decided to go home because I wanted to get my legal documents and all of that. My father came back home and we talked a bit. I just asked him straight up, by the way, did my mother never send you child support for me? My father just scoffed theatrically and went on this rant about how courts are always accessible to the mother and how they told him he couldn't expect anything from her and so on. He pulled that whole story of him begging her for money when he didn't have enough money for my school supplies and her turning him down. I know this is a lie. My mother kept itemized records of all her money wires to my father. Every month since she had a job. Meaning for over 15 years she has sent my father money. In the beginning, she sent him 400, then 600, then 1,000, and eventually 3,000. Then he kept talking, saying how hard it was. That he wished he would have gone after her more. But the courts were not in his favor. He told me how even now, we were barely able to go paycheck to paycheck. His rant was surreal. After he left to go, God knows where, I went snooping through his room where I found a stack of cash in his sock drawer. It was over 5K crammed into the back of his drawer. Things are getting worse. I have all my documents and wrote to my mother so we could maybe meet again. I'm honestly thinking of ghosting my own father. Update 2. My father let me believe my mother abandoned me as a child, but the truth is much worse. I found court documents that confirmed that my mother had been physically assaulted by my father. Upon further research, I determined that my father spent 3 months in jail for the assault. That was when I was 4 years old, which would explain why I do not remember anything at all about that. I met with him a few days ago. This is when I asked again about child support. Posing the question like, hey Dad, did my mother never give you any child support for me? He denied ever receiving child support, citing that courts will go easy on women. That same day I snooped around and found a stack of cash with over 5K in one of his drawers. I did have the data to the household account, but the 3K monthly payment was never figured in that account. Also, I scouted for withdrawals for more than $100 at a time that maybe could explain the 5K stack. I found nothing. Going through the accounts reminded me of how my father made me his accountant from a very young age. I had to keep track of expenses and so on. So many times I was having panic attacks because we would not make it to the end of the month with the money in the account. So many times my father would berate me if I ever asked to go out because we couldn't afford it. When he would allow me to go out, it was always attached to an endless list of requirements that were absurd. Let's take the example of the cinema. I would ask him a week prior and he'd say yes, but that I had to clean the house, drive grandma to the doctor, pick up groceries, leave some dinner ready for me, and many more. So that if I did not complete one single chore, he would pick up a fight with me, making me feel guilty and thus staying home. He would constantly make me feel worthless. Saying I would not survive in university, that I was not talented enough to do this, that I was not good enough to do that. He is extremely reactive. One time in the car I teased him that I would be for the other football team tonight and he kicked me out of the car and made me walk home alone in the pouring rain. There are so many more examples. I thought it was merely my fault or that other dads were also like this. But suffice to say, it is not normal. I contacted my mother after finding all this out. I confronted her with the newfound information. She admitted that it was quite bad and she did fear for her life. My father apparently had friends in law enforcement that were following my mother and making her life impossible, giving her tickets for the most inconsequential stuff, pulling her over for random controls, everything possible to intimidate her or to find dirt on her. My father put her to the ultimatum of just singing over without a fight or he would make her any my life impossible. My mother told me that he had been abusing her since I was born. As early as 1 week postpartum. So when my father uttered the ultimatum, she felt hopeless and just tried to end it. It did not work, and after she was released, my father served her and battled for full custody. Because she was deemed unfit to parent, it was really easy for him. She told me the court actually went pretty hard on her. About a year after that, my mother attempted to establish visitation with me. She reached out to my father, who invited her over. He told her that she could be in my life if she agreed to be together with him again. My mother told him no, and then a fight ensued. That was the night he laid hands on her to the extreme. He did it so badly that she wound up in the hospital. In the hospital, seeing her injuries, they had to report it. So he was sentenced to a year but only served 3 months. At that time, custody of me was with my grandmother. My father resumed custody of me at the time of being released. I was able to corroborate all this after reaching out to my aunt, who has not spoken to our family in 10 years. My aunt Mia basically documented my mother's abuse. She took pictures of her injuries, and recordings of my father screaming and threatening her. She told me that she testified against my father in court and that she could just back up everything my mother said because he was the same to her. I insisted on seeing the pictures and recordings, but my aunt was resistant to this. A part of me did not want to accept that this was reality. My father is a effing monster. I told my mother about everything monetarily that I had found out. She said that legally there was not much we could do. But she spoke with her lawyer, and seeing as I am 18, she started the motion to start transferring me my child support money. She said that for the time being she would give me 1.5K monthly while she still had to pay my dad the money. As soon as the process is greenlit, I am going to get it all. She also agreed to pay for my enrollment fees as well as for the deposit and first month's rent of an apartment in my university town so that I could be as independent as possible. We decided that confronting my father was not a good idea. For neither of us. So we decided on telling my father that my boyfriend's parents invited me to vacation. I have talked to my boyfriend and his parents. They did not even hesitate and immediately said yes. They now know everything and support me 100%. So my mother and his parents are sending us for 2 weeks to a nearby country where they have a summer house. I told my father about the plans and he said that as long as his parents were paying that it was alright, but he did tell me that I had to help him with a million things before leaving again. I have managed to get all my important documents and open a bank account thanks to my aunt's help. So on Thursday, I am officially leaving for 2 weeks and I pray things will get resolved before my return. I am taking all important stuff with me in case things go south fast. Update 3. My father let me believe my mother abandoned me as a child, but the truth is much worse. The night before I left, my father picked up a fight with me for not taking his car for an oil change. He called me everything under the sun, saying I am selfish and a brat, that he raised me better. He then had my grandmother come and say how disappointed they were in me. That I was clearly not mature enough to leave for a holiday, let alone move away for university. They held me awake till 4 a.m. under the disguise of a family meeting, which was basically just a reprimanding session of all I had done wrong in my life. And to be honest, I was demoralized. I was ugly, crying and feeling awful. Thankfully my boyfriend called because I had not answered several texts of his. He helped me transport all my stuff while my father was sleeping and I left without telling him bye. He texted me around 1 p.m. and my father was acting like everything was normal. So the 2 weeks passed very quickly. During the holiday I got an email that I got into a university that has a very good program for political science. So I accepted and put myself on the waiting list for university accommodation. Then everything blew up. My mother suddenly stopped giving my father half the money and held up her promise to me. She was only paying what she was legally obligated to pay and gave me the other half directly. My father was losing it. He began calling, screaming at me to come home at once. Then calling me crying to tell me that the beach of a mother had reappeared and was suing him and now we did not have enough money to pay for the mortgage. I called my mother to ask if she was actually suing him. She said no and said that she had just gone through the courts to start paying me directly instead of my father, which was granted. Then my grandma started texting me, saying I had to come home right away because my father had had a cardiac arrest. Obviously, I went back home with my boyfriend. Only to find our house in literal shambles. There were beer cans, string liquor stuff, and cigarettes everywhere. Apparently when I left my father decided to have a huge party. He invited all these friends that he made in fancy bars. I know that because the lady that was in the hospital with my dad, his girlfriend apparently. She did not know about me, she kept talking about our house as his summer residence. I asked her a few questions. She answered. She is actually pretty sweet but put off by my father now that she knows how he lied. So apparently my father would take the $3,000 and spend them almost fully on appearing to be richer. He had bought some clothing pieces that were high quality. He would hang out in these fancy hotel sky lounges where he met his girlfriend. Then would take her and her friends out to expensive restaurants and clubs. She did not fully admit it but insinuated that they did blow often during those outings. Much like the party that leads my dad emergency. I thanked her and told her that the money was not my father's and she had been lied to. She stayed until my father came to and we could bring him home. Which is when she dumped him and then I broke it to him. I was leaving. He lost his cool and he laid hands on me which led to my nose ending up broken. I was really afraid. He was not even fully recovered. In the hospital, I told the nurse how it happened and the police got involved. My mother took me in the very next day. She is helping me with all the legal things regarding my father. She helped me move out. Helped me move cities. It all happened very, very fast. My boyfriend has been staying over because I am very afraid. My father has been blocked but I have been getting threatening emails. We are planning on pursuing a restraining order and are documenting all his contact attempts. Update 4. My father let me believe my mother abandoned me as a child but the truth is much worse. My father died in the midst of our lawsuit. He had brutally laid hands on me because I was going to leave him and the child support checks that he had been blowing on substances and women would stop with my departure. Last year my whole world crumbled, when I found out that my mother had not left us. My father had abused her and made it impossible for her to take me. He has made my life absolutely miserable. After I was let out of the hospital, my mother and I got 2 amazing lawyers. One for the laying hands case and the other for the misappropriation of the money. The process for the child support case was quick. He had to pack back 50% of the money given to him in the past 3 years to me directly. No further fines. However, the other case spiraled. It was found out that he was going to attempt to plead not guilty in the case of temporary insanity. He had detailed his plan to get away with this to his girlfriend, who is not an awful human, and showed the police what she had. So it went from the original to attempted unalive. With his girlfriend leaving him and him owing a bunch of money, looking at a hefty prison sentence, and no more money to bail himself out, he took his life. I was numb the whole week. But today the realization washed over me. I am finally free. I don't have to look over my shoulder, I don't flinch when I hear steps, I don't have anxiety while checking my phone. As cruel as it is, I am relieved he did it, but almost unsatisfied there wasn't any real justice done. He escaped it, which left a bitter taste in my mouth. I would have liked him to have suffered just a little. After all, he did make my mother and I have to live in fear for too long.